Marriage rates amongst Black British people are the lowest out of all of the major ethnic groups here in Britain. And for me, this is a massive problem because marriage is by far and away the best institution to ensure the prosperity and the well-being, the thriving of the adults, of the parents and of the children. And this is one of the major reasons why we as Black people are facing many of the problems that we face. So join me as I delve into another data-driven analysis of life from a Black British perspective. But first of all, I want to send a massive shout out to the sponsors of this video, More Education. More Education is an online tuition program aimed at children in years 7 through to year 11. Their team of experienced tutors has helped hundreds of students in GCSE English and GCSE Maths with a pass rate of over 90%. And their rates are extremely competitive too, starting at just £11 per hour. So there's a link in the video description. Click on that link to find out how More Education can help your child to fulfill their potential. So first things first, I started off by saying that marriage rates amongst Black people in Britain are the lowest of all of the major ethnic groups. This is from a paper called that's part of the Deaton Review, and it's called Families and Inequality. And we're going to be spending a lot of time in this particular paper. This figure shows you the birth contexts by ethnicity of mother. In other words, it shows you that for those children who are white, mixed, Indian, Pakistani, Black Caribbean, Black African, Bangladeshi, etc., was the mother married? That's the yellow bar. Was the mother cohabiting? That's the green bar. And was the mother non-partnered? In other words, a lone parent, single parent. That's the blue bar. And again, you can see they're very clearly laid out, colourfully laid out there. The biggest yellow bars, in other words, where the proportion of new mothers were married is highest by a country mile amongst the Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshis. The Chinese aren't on this table, on this chart for some reason, but you see that 90% of mothers, of South Asian mothers were married. Then it goes down to about 58%, 56% or something for white mothers, with about another 20 odd percent were cohabiting. So if you add up the cohabiting and married, the rate for the white mothers was around about 80%. And then you got on the far right there, you'll see the least amount of yellow there. First of all, you've got the Black Africans, where less than 50% of the Black African mothers were married, added to another 15% of them were cohabiting. So 40% of Black African mothers were single parents. And then you've got the Black Caribbeans there, even bigger differences there. 60%, well, about 50% of Black Caribbean mothers were single parents. Around about 20% or thereabouts were cohabiting, and only 30% of Black Caribbean mothers were married. So what's the deal? What's going on? Why are so few Black people married here in the UK? Well, to me, it's not a complicated answer. The initial answer, obviously there's factors that go into this answer, but the initial factor, we just don't value marriage. We just don't value it. And it sounds like very too simple, but let's break it down. How often, when you were growing up, were your parents telling you about the importance of marriage and how you had to get married? How often were you talking about this with your friends, with your wider family networks? Is there any taboo around single parenthood? No. Is there any strong cultural pressure to marry and remain married? No. I mean, for many there is, yes, but for the majority there is not. I think that most of us are unaware of the benefits of marriage, or unaware of the positive correlations of marriage, i.e. people who are married have all these other positive things that cluster around them. So let's get into this. My purpose in this video is to demonstrate some of what I see as the benefits of marriage, not from the top of my head, not from my imagination, but from data. So let's get into the topic. First of all, let's talk about the fact that parents who are married are much less likely to break up. This chart comes from an organization called the Marriage Foundation, and it's looking here at the percentage of first-time couple parents who split up by parent marital status and child's age. And you'll see here that the higher the number, that means the higher the proportion of them who break up. And it's the y-axis, that's the percentage, and then the x-axis at the bottom there shows you the age of the child. This is all taken from the Millennium Cohort Study, which is a longitudinal study. You can check my previous videos where I explain what a longitudinal study is, that looks at people who were born in 2000. I think it's about 10,000 people or something like that, and it tracks their lives. The most recent releases focus on them when they were, I think, 14 years old. And it's very clear here, amongst those who never married, the rates of breakup were much, much higher, ranging from about 25% of them had broken up by the time the child was 3, skyrocketing up to half of them by the time the child was 11, and 60% of them by the time the child was 14. Contrast that with the married parents. The dark blue line is the parents who were married at birth. And then the lighter blue line is the parents who were married after birth. And you'll see there that it ranges from well under 10% of them had broken up by the time the child was 3, and then up to 20% by the time the child was 20. I'll say that again. 20% of the parents who were married at birth had broken up by the time the child was 14, and it's higher for the parents who had got married after birth. Interestingly, that had gone up to about 30%. But in any case, it's very clear there that parents who are married are much less likely to break up than parents who are not married, or parents who get married after birth. Now, you might be saying, well, so what? If you're not happy, break up. Breaking up's good. It's better to be happy it's better to be happy, so break up if you're unhappy in your marriage. This is the modern Western perspective of marriage. Do what's right for you. You individually, one person, you must be happy. Everything else must be subservient to your individual happiness. Well, I'm going to come on to that in a minute, that actually parents who are married, mothers in particular who are married, are generally happier than those who are not. But first of all, I want to show you that parents breaking up is bad for children. This is a paper from UCL. Again, looking at data from the Millennium Cohort Study. They compared information on children who experienced a family split with those who didn't. A fifth, that is 20%, of children in the study saw their parents separate between the ages of 3 and 14. Children whose parents broke up in late childhood and early adolescence, between the ages of 7 and 14, had on average a 16% increase in emotional problems and an 8% rise in conduct issues in the short term. Children whose parents separated earlier, between ages 3 and 7, were no more likely to experience mental health problems either in the short term or later on by age 14 than those living with both parents, which is interesting actually. Among older children, increased emotional problems were apparent for both boys and girls, but heightened behavioural issues were observed in boys only. The researchers also found that after a family breakup, children from more privileged backgrounds were just as likely to have mental health problems as their less advantaged peers. So a lot of interesting stuff in there. The links, of course, to all of these sources will be in my Substack, lewananda.substack.com. Make sure you go there and sign up. It's completely free and you get emailed all of the sources that I use in my videos. You can also use that to support me financially, to support the channel financially, to help to keep this show on the road and to help to keep the quality and the quantity of analysis coming your way. Now, I mentioned earlier that marriage appears to be good for the mental health, mental well-being, psychological well-being of the mothers. So let's dig into this now. This table here comes from the Deaton Review, and it's looking at the family trajectories up to age 5 and poverty and mother's psychological well-being at the age 5. Look at the first column first, family trajectory. What that shows you, it's broken down into 3 sections. You've got the families where the parents were married at birth, and then it breaks that down into whether they were stable, whether they had periods of separation, whether they'd become lone parents, whether they'd become repartnered. And then it's the same for the other 2 categories, cohabiting at birth, again, stable, married, periods, those who are cohabiting at birth, and then looks at what may have happened to them afterwards. And then it's got those who are lone parents at birth. And you see there, the sample size right at the bottom there is 14,000 people that we're talking about here. So a very, very large data set. And you'll see here, let's look at the second column there now. So what percentage of the mothers in each of these categories had experienced psychological or mental distress? Much lower there amongst mothers who were married, just 9.5%, compared to mothers who were cohabiting, goes up to 14%, and those who were lone parents had gone up to 25%. So if you look at the parents who were cohabiting and lone parents, those ones who went on to become married, the rates of psychological distress went down. So for example, lone parent mothers who had gone on to become married, only 12% of them had experienced psychological distress. And this is significant because when mothers have experienced psychological distress, the same data set from the Millennium Cohort Study shows us that the children suffer. This table here, smaller table here, shows you on the left-hand side, it shows you for those mothers who had not experienced any poor mental health, the proportion of their children who by the age of 5 were in the lowest cognitive classification, naming vocabulary. This is like one of the cognitive outcomes that they measure at age 5. Only 6% of them were in the lowest decile for those. Whereas for those who had experienced some mental health, up to 10%, and for those who had experienced persistent poor mental health, that went up to 15% of their children were in the lowest cognitive decile. And then when you look at the behavioral problems as well, for those parents who had not experienced any poor mental health, that's only 4.4% of their children by age 5 were in had experienced a high level of behavioral problems. For those mothers who had experienced some poor mental health, that went up to 16% of them. Their children were in the worst kind of behavioral categories. And then for those mothers who had experienced persistent poor mental health, a whopping 37% of those children were in the worst decile for behavioral problems. And then if we return back to the other table we looked at, let's look at the middle column now. This is the family experiencing income poverty. And you'll see there, as you'd expect, the percentage of families who experienced income poverty was of course much lower amongst married parents and much higher amongst lone parents and even higher amongst cohabiting parents. And as with poor maternal mental health, income poverty is correlated with poor outcomes for children at age 5. So those are just some of the benefits or the positive associations between marriage and our life outcomes, which hopefully will give you food for thought. And I think it's important that we as Black people in particular are aware of this kind of information, and we'll use this kind of data, this kind of information to reflect and think, okay, well, maybe we need to be thinking about reinstalling marriage as at the center of our culture, of our philosophy here in the UK. Now, in a future video, I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into why is there this association between marriage and these positive life outcomes. So stay tuned, make sure you subscribe to the channel, make sure that you like this video. I look forward to your thoughts and questions,